Growing supply of labor. Before the Civil War, only New England was truly industrialized with the textile industry. The West was still nearly all agrarian. Now, half of all industrial workers labored in plants with more than 250 employees. In 1880, the census found the majority of the workforce in non-farming jobs. By 1890, two-thirds of Americans were wage workers. Workers were now drawn to factories because of the promise of employment, creating a new middle class. 11 million Americans moved from farm to city, and another 25 million Americans moved from overseas between 1870 and 1920. Government encouragement for development. The government actively promoted industrial and agricultural development by enacting high tariffs, thus protecting the American industry from foreign competition. In New York, the city financed industrialization and westward expansion. The banks and stock exchanges funneled money to mines, railroads, and factories. The railroad. Congress authorized the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad, connecting the Pacific and Atlantic lines in 1861. Originally, the federal government provided subsidies by the mile to railroad companies in exchange for discounted rates. Congress also provided federal land grants to railroad companies so that they could lay more track. Railroads became profitable because of the massive government subsidies and granted land. Basically, railroads were not regulated by the government at all. Although some states passed laws to regulate corrupt railroads, the Supreme Court made a regulation on a state level impossible with the 1886 case Wabash ruling, which stated that only the federal government could regulate interstate commerce.
Credit Mobilier was another government scandal involving both Congress and the Union Pacific Railroad Company that showed the government would turn a blind eye to unethical business activity. Big business. Captains of industry were not regulated by the government and did whatever they could to make as much money as possible. Giant corporations like U.S. Steel and Standard Oil dominated major parts of the economy, in part because of the government encouraged them by failing to regulate these monopolies. Without government regulations, big businesses could rise to power and create monopolies, inflating prices, eliminating competition, and hurting consumers. In the late 1800s, the government tried to step in with monopolies, but it proved ineffective. The Interstate Commerce Act, 1887, outlawed railroad rebates and kickbacks, established Interstate Commerce Commission, but had too many loopholes and became very ineffective. The Sherman Antitrust Act, 1890, was an attempt to ban trusts but was also ineffective. Expansion of factory production and railroad construction. This rapid expansion of mining, railroad, and factory production in all parts of the nation, except for the South, signaled the transition from Lincoln's America to a mature industrial society. By 1913, the United States produced one-third of the world's industrial output, which was more than Great Britain, France, and Germany combined. Manufacturing took place in industrial cities like New York and Chicago. The core of the Industrial Revolution was in the Great Lakes region. The railroad made the Second Industrial Revolution possible. Massive federal, state, and local land and money grants. The number of miles of railroad track in the U.S. tripled between 1860 and 1880 and tripled again by 1920, opening vast new areas to commercial farming and creating a national market for manufactured goods.